This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, ma'am, and welcome for this session. So just a couple of days we were talking about that you are a reviewer in a couple of good journals, and one of the very threatening thing you told me that the rejection rate is very high, and because of a number of the issue which actually led to this session, that where the students are making wrong, what goes wrong, where the students are making the mistake, or as a reviewer what will be your perspective. So ma'am, I have some 10 11 questions for it which I have prepared for this session. I will ask this question, but if you want to start for any introductory remarks, etc., you can please go ahead.
Okay, good evening, Dr. Neeraj Kaushik, and thank you very much. In fact, it's also a matter of great, honor for me to be part of this, your research endeavors, which you keep on, your research initiatives you keep on taking up. So I would try to address your queries as a reviewer. So I'm reviewing the papers of, papers which are sent by the authors to different journals. So I'm reviewing since long. So based on my own experience, so I would try to address your queries, your questions, and maybe if you would have some leading questions to your main questions, so I would also try to, maybe try to address those questions also. So as a reviewer, what I have seen is, I'm talking as an Indian writer basically, and what the Indian writers, academic writing I'm talking about, what do they write and what do they expect also from the journals. So the very basic thing is, that this is again my own observation. So based on my observation, I'm reporting that most of the, if suppose that, on an average after 50, after, you can say in a month, I am reviewing 2 or 3 papers. So after, you can say after a year, if I have to analyze the acceptance rate of those papers, it is very low. So if I am reviewing on an average, if you can say that 20 articles in a year, if I am reviewing, so out of 20 articles, hardly you would find that 2 or 3 articles, they would receive major revision. Rest of the papers, they get DEX rejection. So, and what do we look as a reviewer? What do we look in the journals, in the journal articles, academic writing? We are only concerned about the very first section. I'm not talking about abstract, but I'm talking about the very first section in the paper, that is the introduction section. We have to first carefully go through that introduction section, and then we make up our mind, should we proceed further? Should we look into the other sections or not? And otherwise, it's that paper is outrightly rejected if that paper neither has a problem nor has a well-defined research question, and also there is no research gap. And to my surprise, most of the papers which are written by the Indian management researchers, scholars, they completely lack the problem. Paper does not have a problem. And this leading to this is, one grave problem again associated with this is, one is they do not identify the problem. In fact, they do not have a problem itself. Second thing is, there is no research gap also. So because of these two reasons, that there is neither a problem nor a research gap. So on what basis a paper should be reviewed? On what basis a paper should be reviewed? So only these are the two important criteria based on which even the editors and the associate editors, they take the decision to pass it on to the reviewers for the review purposes. Otherwise, such type of papers, they get a very, clean sheet from the editor's text only. So they do not send it out for the review. So, and that's why most of the time you would find 95% times you would find that there is a DEX rejection from the editor's office only. So even the reviewers, they do not get those papers, because those papers, so one thing which everybody looks for, editor, associate editor, and the reviewers also, what they look for is the problem which would lead to the contribution to the, which would have significant contribution towards particular area, towards the research area. So this was something which I wanted to share, and now we can start with your questions. Yes, Dr. Neeraj Kaushik.
Ma'am, I have just a doubt here. it's a customary to write 2-3 research gap, like not many areas are there in, not many papers are there in my area, or the papers are very old, or the study is not conducted in this part of India. So you don't consider them as a valid research gap?
No, 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 no. If you would say, that such type of study has been conducted in the developed nations, but nobody has conducted in Indian context, so which means that application of the study, the application of the model which has been tested, so we don't buy that idea because there is nothing which is unique in it. There is nothing which is unique. Yes, yes. Adding to this, what Indian researchers, what Indian writers, authors, they are not understanding is, though as an Indian researchers, management researchers, there is something which is unique about our country. What is so unique about our country? Uniqueness is when we talk about the environment which prevails, because we are talking about the emerging economy. India is an emerging economy. As an emerging economy, if you want to place something on the research board, then you have to present it in such a manner that India, being a country which is different from US, different from UK and all the developed nations, in which context you are saying so? Is it the level of competition? Is it the level of technology? Or is it the market dynamism? So I'm talking about the environmental variables. So you should talk from those environmental variables point of view. Or you should reflect something which is unique regarding India. Maybe you talk about, like if you talk about the information technology, so people are quite, they are apprehensive of using the technology. So something, or paper would not be published. It's very difficult to get publication in elite journals unless there is something which we call a novelty in your study, something which we call as newness in your study. If there is no novelty, no newness in your study, nobody is going to read your paper. Nobody is going to publish your paper. So that we have to keep in mind. If we are targeting quality journal, what is required is what is the theoretical contribution of your study. When I say theoretical contribution of the study, so that has, again, it has 2 points to discuss here. One is either your paper is extending the existing theory. Your paper is extending the existing theory. So when I say extension of the existing theory, so that means to say, even if you are borrowing the model from the previous literature, when you are adding 1 or 2 more constructs to it, those constructs which are unique to Indian context, or those constructs which are unique to a particular sector in which you are conducting your research work, then everybody would be interested. Second important thing here is, one is extension of the theory. Second important thing to keep in mind while writing a paper is, or you refute the theory. You refute the existing theories. When you say refuting the existing theory, it means if in the developed nations they say customer satisfaction always leads to customer loyalty, and you have a proper explanation and justification and rationale to it that customer satisfaction not necessarily always would lead to customer loyalty, so that means you are refuting the previous findings, then yes, everybody would be interested to listen to you. So 2 things we have. One is Indian setting. Second, but Indian setting means, again, we have to talk from the environmental variables point of view. And second important thing which we have is that a particular sector we are talking about, in which that whatever the previous findings they talk about, those previous findings, they get refuted. Those findings do not get accepted. So these are the 2 situations where we as Indian researchers, we can get our papers published in the elite journals. So that is possible. But otherwise, if we say, because such type of a study has not been conducted in Indian context, nobody is going to buy your idea. Yes, like I would give you an example here. Links and Greenlay's paper in 2005 was in the retailing context in UK. And I wrote a paper adopting their scale with slight modification in those wordings of the items. So I rephrase those items, and I use those items in the Indian banking sector context. So that is the retailing context. This is a financial services context. So, and yes, there were changes. we could find that, that all those items or all those constructs, they were not, absolutely they were not in fit with the in that Indian banking sector context. So there were changes. So those changes were reflected. So that is something, this is what you can say. Yes, when you are adopting the scale, adapting the scale, modifying those scales, and then when you are able to show, that that scale is not a proper fit or is not an appropriate fit in different context, then people are ready and they would be happy to read your paper, and it got accepted. So something, I mean, so there are different things, we do not, as a reviewer, I'm saying, we do not give any importance to the methodology nowadays. Methodology, because most of the time, so the scholars, the researchers, they are getting the data through Google Forms or any other form, online forms, right? So they are getting, so there is no methodology to talk about nowadays. Secondly, we are least concerned about the technique being used. We do not give any importance to the technique. A simple regression would be sufficient enough. Whereas we Indian researchers, I've gone through the papers and I've seen that, they have used wonderful techniques. I'm not saying those techniques are not appropriate or those are not relevant. But my point here is, though they are relevant, but then, this making use of sophisticated techniques would not add anything to there would be no significant contribution to your paper. And we would not look into the technique also. If we have already read introduction and we feel discouraged that, no, it has to be outrightly rejected. And that's why rejection rate is 90%. So acceptance rate is hardly 10% in case of, I'm talking about, because most of the papers written by the Indian writers, I do review those recently. Now also I have one paper received, which I received from IJPE, International Journal of Production Economics. Journal of Small Business Management also. So, I mean, good journals, they are sending the papers. So, and maybe because they find me that I am an Indian author, Indian contributor to their journal. So that's why they are sending those papers to me. And unfortunately, problem is missing in the papers. That is the unfortunate part. There is no problem as such in the paper, which has been identified by them. And then we feel discouraged, we feel disheartened that our paper has not even they have not given a chance for the revision. So yes, sir.
I got it. So ma'am, let's see it from the start. See, the problem I see somewhere is might be in the education system also, because in the graduation and the post graduation we are taught to study and then write a paper. So in the paper, most of the time there is a very direct question in the UG and the PG, and as a student we write the answers. Then we come to PhD, and then we say you just express your thoughts in a particular manner, etc. So my first question is, how is a normal writing different from the academic writing? What precautions should be taken?
Yeah. So this is really a very relevant question. In fact, why I'm saying so is because the way our education system has groomed everybody, me, you as well, so it is all the bookish language, bookish knowledge, we also adopt the same thing, bookish knowledge, which is disseminated to us. So we also try to speak the same language and try to write also in the same language, so the bookish knowledge which is provided to us, it does not let us to think something which is different, or we do not have that that problem solving approach or creative thinking approach. We never followed it, and it was so all the questions, they are coming from the syllabus, which is well defined. So we never apply our mind, we never apply our logics also in order to provide an answer to it. In fact, even our teachers also do not want that we should write over and above what do they expect or what is given in the books. So similarly, here also, otherwise in the foreign countries, what is happening is a child starts looking at the problem, and he or she starts they are doing research from the very beginning. So it is the research based teaching which is provided to them, to the students. So there is a logic. scientific reasoning is there, critical thinking is there, which is completely lacking in the Indian education system as a result, because the way we have been brought up, the way we have been groomed in our education system. So that is something which we are projecting in our writing also. You are right. So academic writing and a normal writing, to me, both the writings, they have a purpose. Purpose means we know that this is our paper, this is our title, and we have to write a paper on this title. We know about it. Purpose, I mean to say the goal, the objective of the paper. Objective of the paper is clear to us. Even the one who is writing some article for a newspaper or a magazine, he knows that what is his objective. He knows what is his objective. So maybe a very contemporary topic he has taken up, but he is very much clear about his objective, and he would write everything around that objective only. Similarly, in the academic writing also, what the Indian management researchers and scholars, teachers, academicians are clear about, they are clear about their objective. They know what is the basic objective of their paper, of their study. But this is not what the journals expect. If you would ask me, objective comes at number 4 in the ladder. Objective comes at number 4 in the ladder. So now if I have to talk about these steps, first is the problem. Every paper should start with a problem. I'm talking with academic writing, which is not the case when you talk about a normal writing. No. So first, the academic writing should start with the problem. What is the problem? So we keep on writing the entire thesis, and at the end we provide the strategies for the managers, for the practitioners. But we are providing a solution or the strategies for a problem which we have not identified and which we have not stated. So why are we providing the strategies or the suggestions to the managers when there is no problem? We provide solutions when there is a problem. So first is, in case of academic writing, first of all, a researcher has to be clear about the problem. What is the problem in hand? Once you are clear about the problem, then you start. Otherwise, Dr. Neeraj Kaushik, you talk about a new researcher who has just taken admission in the PhD program, right? Does he know about the topic? Or does the supervisor know about the topic? No. Neither the supervisor nor the scholar. What is he supposed to review then? What is he supposed to review? If you would say, I have an interest in the area of HR, in HR or in marketing, whatever his interest or inclination is for a particular, maybe for a particular discipline, he can at the most tell you that about that only. Then as a supervisor, what you would suggest him to do? We do not know. Because we do not, first as a researcher, I'm talking both from the supervisor's point of view and the scholar's point of view, I'm talking about, if there is no problem, then which part of the research papers you would ask the scholars to scan, to review? Because he doesn't have any problem. As a supervisor, if you would say that the employees switching, actual switching I'm talking about, employees actual switching rate is growing up, is rising up. So there is a problem in it. There is a problem in it. And then you would say that, why don't you study those papers, review those papers which have reflected the factors affecting employees switching, their switching behavior. What are the factors? So if it is in case of services sector or maybe in a manufacturing context, whatever it is, so a scholar would then start, because unless and until there is a problem, neither the scholar nor the supervisor would be clear about, which stream of research papers would he be reviewing. What to review? What to review? We are not clear about it. So unless you gain clarity about the problem, unless there is any problem in hand, so you are directionless. You are directionless. So research problem, once you identify the research problem, that research problem, then you would, pertaining to that research problem, you would identify the themes, and then you would start reviewing the papers, the related papers, the pertinent papers you would say. Once those papers, once you would identify, then from those papers, you would identify the research gap. Now we would see the problem which we have identified, and now the research gap which we have identified. Is there a proper balance between the two or not? Most of the times it happens that, maybe I am perceiving that this is a problem. So again, I'm talking about descriptive research only I'm talking about. So I'm saying that this is a problem, but after reviewing the papers, I come to know many papers have already been published, and this is no more a problem. The problem which I perceive it to be a problem, that is no more a problem, because a solution has already been provided to that problem. So what to do? So that's why, once you have identified a problem, you need to validate that problem with the research gap. Yes, there is a gap in the literature which validates my problem. So problem followed by the research gap, and from that research gap, now you have to frame a very, not something which is intuitive. So something which is counterintuitive sort of research question you have to frame. So not the question like what are the factors influencing employee switching behavior. No. So it has to be something, I mean, such type of question. So by I'm saying intuitive, they would provide a very straightforward answers to you. So you need not to conduct a research, because with that, so once you have something like counterintuitive type of research questions, then comes your objective. So now you very well imagine the 3 steps which are ignored by the Indian researchers and the scholars. They do not identify the problem. Then they do not support that problem with the help of the research gap. And finally, they do not frame any research question. There is no research question in their papers. So they start with the research objective. So when you talk about the academic writing, yes, they have the objectives, but something which is expected by the journals, that is extremely missing in those papers. So academic writing problem has to be identified, research gap has to be identified. It's always better to frame a research question than to talk about the objectives, than to talk about the hypothesis. And when I say problem and when I say research gap, both when they sync together, they provide something which is unique to the existing body of literature. So that is a theoretical contribution. So these things are important. Identification of the problem is important in academic writing. Theoretical contribution would be derived from it, and theoretical contribution has to be provided. At the end, theoretical implications of your study, those have to be provided in your paper. So these are the essential aspects of academic writing, whereas in case of normal writing, yes, they have a purpose, and there is a flow also in it, and finally they would conclude, and they would not provide those, there would be no such implications also. So there are no references, no citations required in case of normal writing, whereas in academic writing, so whatever you read, though everything has to be in your own writing, in your own language, that has to be your own writing, but we have to provide citations. The appropriate citations have to be provided. Otherwise, that case of plagiarism is there for you, and you have to bear the consequences. So academic writing is something which I would say again, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And in case of academic writing, the very first section, that is the introduction section, itself requires between 65 to 70% of the time and the efforts, research efforts. And it requires not less than 7 to 8 iterations also. So only, so once you write the introduction, keep it somewhere, then you relook at it after 1 week's time, and then you would find, now there are certain changes which you need to introduce, you need to bring into that section, and then you keep it aside for 1 week. And, introduction itself takes not less than 3 months. And then also once you write the entire paper, then finally again you have to, final look has to be given to the introduction section. Trust me, rest all sections are managed. You can manage all the sections, but not the introduction section. That is where comes the originality, the novelty would be reflected from the introduction section, no other section. So I hope I have provided an answer to it. Yes, there is a difference in the academic writing and the normal writing. Academic writing is more laborious. It has to be more scientific. It has to be more systematic, because more or less in the academic writing, you would find the sections of the paper, more or less, they remain the same. They remain the same. Whereas in case of normal writing, you may go here and there. You may not be that focused, but this is not the case when you talk about, because synchronization is utmost required when you talk about the academic writing. So yes.
Thank you, ma'am. You have explained it in so detailed and very structured way. But
Thank you.
if I step into the shoes of a research scholar, allow me to, as a research scholar who has just enrolled, the world seems so hazy and, nothing is certain. So if I just step into the shoes of a newly enrolled scholar, what I see, number one, whatever I wish to work upon, it's already been taken. People have already, published papers and papers on it. So I am clueless. Then the guide or some wise people tell me, take this topic, like electric vehicles are taking, and then take the adoption, work on it. So it's like I'm not chosen, I'm given the topic. Third thing is that I don't know how to start with, how to write the things, like you said, theory, etc. There should be theory, but maybe, at the to the PG level we have the subjects. I don't know where from to find the theory, how to read the theory, how to, and most of the theories are from 1970s, 80s, etc. So there can be question like, these are so old theory, so what is the new theory, how to read? Or it may be read the A category, A star category journal, but I don't have the subscription of the same. So word seems so, misty. There are few people who know how to write and they keep on writing 20 papers, and though there are the people who don't know how to write. You start writing for conference, every single thing is accepted in the conference, and every single thing they write in the papers, they are rejected. Particularly when I talk about the state university students, one particular thing I have observed is a problem in the English also, ma'am. The expression, the way we express in the English, that's again a thing. Now, these all the things are beyond our control. So if you can please share some light, like how should I go ahead with that?
Yeah, I think again, very relevant question, because I also, so you have compelled me to think about my own status when I was a scholar, PhD scholar student, in fact. So because we use here the term scholar, and in US they use the term scholar, who is a very distinguished professor. So as a PhD candidate, so what matters here is, Dr. Neeraj Kaushik, that a student, PhD candidate who is just enrolled, he is, he has no clue, no idea about research. He does not know even the ABC of research. He does not have any idea about the research. And then if we would expect him to read A star journal articles, or if we would expect him to maybe to provide a title or to suggest something about his synopsis or about his PhD thesis title also, so this is something which we are over expecting from him. A PhD candidate's job starts when he would enroll himself. At that point of time, what is required and what is actually missing in the Indian context, in our old traditional universities, what is missing is a continuous interaction. As a supervisor, we think that we are above all the scholars, PhD candidates, and why to interact with the students, PhD candidates or students, so we never interact with them. In fact, at the most, I've seen many supervisors, they would simply give the topic and they leave the candidate there only. What is required is continuous interaction is required. We have to nurture that habit of reading in the scholar. if we are asking a scholar, initially if we are asking him to read a paper which has appeared in A-star journal, so what we need to tell him that, you try to understand whatever you are able to and come to me regarding those themes or regarding whatever, whatever queries you have regarding that particular article. So we should not expect that he would be able to understand that paper entirely. No. Ask him that, what appeals to you or whatever you have understood in that paper. And that paper has to be discussed with him. So when we say that, a PhD candidate has been enrolled and everything is left up to him, or a topic is dumped, or it is actually imposed on him, topic is imposed on him that you have to work on this topic. That is not done, actually. What we need to do is we need to sit and like, a psychologist, he has to understand the problem, where the problem lies. We as a supervisor, we have to understand his competence level, his intellect level, his interest also. If he's not so much interested in the research, how to create that interest in him. So we have to work with him. So one PhD candidate means that you are also doing PhD along with him. Because like my research was on market orientation. Thereafter, I do not think that I have given that market orientation, only market orientation construct to any of my scholars. Every new scholar would have a new topic, which means I am also enrolling myself for PhD program. So we both are doing the PhD together. He would be given a degree and I would be considered as a supervisor at the end. But we have to discuss, because if you are asking him to read the paper as a supervisor, even you are supposed to read that paper just to check that he may be not correct in interpreting the things, or is he able to understand the things properly or not, because we are not fortunate every time to get a brilliant or a sharp student. The way you are saying that, the students, this, because English is not our native language, so we always face a problem. But those are the problem, those are the problems which can be taken care of at the end. Now the solution which I have for this problem is, you have somebody from the foreign university as the last author. He would polish your paper at the end. He would take care of your language. So this is something, yes, you have to add his name to it. That is for sure. But what is required is, somewhere we have to work hard with the scholar. We have to ask him to read a lot, and at the same time even we have to read. When I say problem identification, from where would we be getting the problem? How would we identify the problem? We would identify the problem when we would look into the various reports, various published reports, or when we would look into the various articles which have appeared in the certain magazines, right? From there, from those committee reports, or from those, agency reports, or from those newspaper articles or magazine articles, we would get the statistics. And that statistics would indicate the problem, that this is the problem which is there. If we would leave everything up to the scholar, he would not be able to do. We have to devote same amount of time, and that is why, sir, nowadays what is happening is, Indian education system, I'm talking more about the PhD, we are producing more PhD candidates. So we are focusing more on the quantity rather than the quality. Universities are also putting pressures on the professors also to guide eight scholars at a time. When you are guiding, and when you're supposed to guide 8 scholars at a time, what type of quality do you expect? What type of quality? But because this mushroom growth of PhDs candidates, and then at the end, these candidates, they are also very depressive, they are frustrated, they are stressed. They're stressed out. Why? They are not getting jobs. They are not getting jobs. Somewhere, we cannot blame the supervisor. Yes, if I'm given 2 or maximum 3 candidates, I can devote considerable time towards doing the quality research. But if I have 5 or 6 or more than that number, even I cannot justify. I cannot justify, because then, when I have to identify the problem along with the scholar, so it is very difficult also. And then, then expecting from a supervisor or a scholar also that, quality research would be done. Again, that is something which is not visible and which is not viable also. As a scholar, if I have to, flashback, I have to see that, what is the difference in when we did the research work and now when the scholars, today's scholars I have to talk about. We used to read a lot, sir. You're talking about A-star papers are not available. So we used to visit Ratan Tata Library to get the papers. And we used to read. At that point of time also, I read around 100 papers. Those 100 papers, they were on my tips. I used to remember the name of the authors. I used to remember the purpose of the paper. I used to remember their major findings. Also, everything I used to remember. You're talking about the theory. How many theories? Maximum 2 or 3 theories they are. I mean, because we are talking about the PhD thesis, which is, quite voluminous. So in that case, because the model itself is also very big, so we can expect at the most 3 theories, not more than that. To gain confidence regarding the 3 theories is not something which is something, extraordinary which we are expecting from our scholars. No, sir. They have to read those papers, or they have to read, who has actually introduced this theory. So the paper which published in 1965, in 1970. So nowadays, because this SCI hub provides you with almost not those which are in the press, but otherwise, almost all the papers these scholars they are getting it. And now we have IIMs almost in every state. IIMs and IITs, they are almost in every state. Even if they are asking for some subscription fee or some fee for it, they have everybody. Now, it is at your doorstep to get the papers. So they can easily visit. They can easily visit the IIMs or IIT's library and they can download the papers. So I used to travel from Jammu to Delhi. So many people, they might have traveled at that time from Madras to Delhi also to get those papers. But now it is not that difficult. So the problem is nowadays scholars do not want to work hard because of this nature. They do not want to read the papers. As a researcher, you need to have patience and you need to read a lot. This reading habit has to be inculcated. A supervisor has to ask the scholar to read at least one paper a day. At least one paper a day. With that, within 3-4 months, his entire literature review would be over. Every day he has to read a paper, and very next day he has to discuss that paper with the supervisor. But then supervisor has also to he has to devote a same time. Like my supervisor, every day he used to call and every day he used to check whatever I used to write. But yes, that time he also never encouraged the discussion, interaction. But I am of this view that you need to, because I cannot grow as a researcher. I cannot grow unless I discuss with my scholars. I have grown. I'm not talking about what level, but if there is some growth in me, it is all because of my scholars. I have learned a lot from them. They used to read a paper, and suppose that I have not read that paper, or maybe they used to discuss certain things with, because they are living with that problem. They have to seep in that problem to get a full understanding of the problem. And in order to understand that problem, a continuous interaction is required. Like my scholar, I talked about my scholar also. I have right now only one PhD scholar. So every day she would call me, and every day she would share some new information with me. So from where I am getting all these, details, scholars they would bring. So what I think is that, we cannot blame the scholar for it. What is required is how, as a supervisor, we are nurturing our scholars. What type of habits we want to inculcate in them. So at least as a supervisor, we should continuously interact with them. You should not think that you are a supervisor and he is your candidate, PhD candidate. No, you should think that you are also you have to become a friend to him, that wherein you are allowing him and you are actually permitting him to discuss the things with you, research things with you, so that you can also provide your inputs. You can also add something to that, and maybe if he is somewhere, if he is going somewhere, he's not going in a proper direction, you can provide a guidance, or you can provide a proper direction to him there. So we have to work hard, and we should not expect from the scholars if we are not ready to work with that scholar. So but yes, scholars have to read a lot. That is there. They have to work hard and they have to read a lot. That is something which every supervisor can expect from the PhD candidate. Yes, sir.
Thank you ma'am, for that detailed answer. But you mentioned all the points very clearly and very in a good structure. But I was just just one observation that not all scholars are lucky to have a guide like you, and there can be different regions. Let's
Yes.
better not go for those regions. But ma'am, if a scholar starts means a PhD candidate, if a PhD candidate starts their journey and plan to write the first paper. Now these days, the PhD candidates are told, you should go for bibliometric analytics or meta-analysis or go for the SLR or different sort of. So how you suggest should be the first paper?
I think every scholar should try to write a theoretical paper first, because he has reviewed so many papers. He has reviewed so many papers. So after reviewing the papers, because in those papers only now he has clarity regarding those theories which have been used in those papers, and now he is well aware of those theories in which his own conceptualization is grounded. So he knows, that, these are the papers, and now he has identified the research gap also. He has identified the research gap. So when you talk about a theoretical paper, because I have written only 2 theoretical papers, and out of those 2 theoretical papers, one paper was adjudged as the outstanding paper also in marketing intelligence and planning long back into 2010. But I understand, after writing those 2 papers, it is very difficult to write a theoretical paper, very difficult to write, and all the more difficult to get a theoretical paper published. So I'm talking about marketing intelligence and planning. Now it is a quality journal in ABDC ranking, but in 2010 it was not a known journal also. Marketing intelligence and planning was not a, not a reputed journal, I would say, rather, but now it is a category journal. So I understand that, after reviewing so many papers, finally I could write. And what is expected? One thing is, it is very difficult to write a theoretical paper. But what is expected from the scholar, from a student or researcher when he is writing a theoretical paper? If you are able to identify the research gaps, and if you are able to provide a future research directions, these are the 2 things which the editors or the reviewers they are looking for. So the research gaps identified by you and the future research directions suggested by you. So rightly stated by you that, nowadays we also expect that after reviewing so many papers now, before going for the survey, what do we expect from the scholars? We expect that at least they should write one theoretical paper. So now a student is confused, like theoretical paper. So theoretical paper, you said, nowadays we talk about bibliometric analysis, we talk about this systematic literature review, we also talk about the meta-analysis also. So in case of bibliometric analysis, so it is both quantitative analysis, it will provide qualitative analysis also, it will provide. Meta-analysis talks about the quantitative analysis only, talks about the correlation value and weighted average scores, and talks about the effect size. And then when you talk about the systematic literature review, so it talks about the qualitative analysis only. So I would suggest the every PhD candidate that they must write a theoretical paper. After writing that theoretical paper, they would gain more clarity, understanding regarding their own research work. They would be all the more confident about their research work, right? And then pursuing the empirical work would not be difficult for them, because where do our scholars lack? Our scholars lack totally in having a conceptual clarity. They are not clear about these research gaps, and they are not clear about the what do they intend to do. So in that case, what is like what I expect from my scholars? So I do not ask them to go for bibliometric analysis or systematic literature review, neither for the meta-analysis. First of all, I ask them, when they are reviewing a paper, for the beginners I am saying, when they are reviewing the paper, they should provide answers to these 5 questions. They have to write down the answers to these 5 questions. And those 5 questions are, so the first question is, because now they are reviewing the papers written by the different authors. So the very first paper which they have written, so they have to provide an answer to the question, what the author or the authors are trying to achieve. So these are the 5 research questions, or these are the 5 questions, when I did my FTP, faculty development program from IIM Ahmedabad. So there, these 5 questions they were taught to us, that how would you review a paper. So I'm just narrating that same those 5 questions, what the author or the authors are trying to achieve. So I mean to say the objective of that paper which you have reviewed. Second, why the authors are trying to achieve which they intended to achieve. First is what the authors they are trying to achieve. Second is why the authors are trying to achieve which they intended to achieve. That is the research gap identified by them. Third research question is, how have they achieved the objective, the purpose? That is the methodology, the procedure which they have followed. What have they achieved is my fourth question. What have they achieved? The results, the findings of their study. And fifth is what is left for the others to achieve. That is the future research directions. So basically, when you talk about reviewing one paper, so initially we should ask the students that they should keep in mind these 5 questions. They should provide an answer to all these questions. And then you can ask them to go for bibliometric analysis if they want to go for both qualitative and quantitative analysis, or you can ask them to go for meta-analysis, which will provide quantitative analysis only, or SLR, which will provide only qualitative analysis. And I would suggest the beginners to read the paper recently written by Naveen Dhodlu and other authors are there in Journal of Business Research, JBR, in 2021. So very beautifully in that paper they have drawn the differences between the 3, that is bibliometric analysis, meta-analysis, and systematic literature review. I mean, in a very lucid manner, they have given that how these 3 are different. And then the scholar, PhD candidate can look into it. Should he go for bibliometric analysis? Should he go for systematic literature review? Or should he write a paper on meta-analysis? Or it could be a hybrid also, a combination of 2 can also be taken up by the PhD candidate. But it is always good, why I'm saying that either of these 3, a paper should be written on either of these 3, so that a candidate becomes confident about his research work, so that he gets more clear ideas about what is he going to do, and so that every time he can question himself with why am I doing this, why am I writing this paper, so that he can question. As a researcher, ask your scholars to always question why am I doing this, right? So this systematic literature review, bibliometric analysis, a combination of both, or maybe meta-analysis also. Meta-analysis is limited to the extent there we analyze the relationship between the variables or the constructs. So whereas systematic literature review, I mean, it helps you to synthesize all the papers which you have studied. So I mean, better ask the students to go for a systematic literature review, so that so that he gains more clarity and he has a wider knowledge of his own research work, and so that he can, and maybe you can always ask him that the first chapter of your thesis would be a systematic literature review, so that the rest of the chapters he can always write down, and he would be more confident also in writing the rest of the chapters. So it is always better, but I would suggest that they should read this paper written by Naveen Dhontu in JBR. Naveen Dhontu and other authors are also there in JBR, which appeared in 2021 only. So they should read this paper. It's a beautifully written paper, and they would gain more clarity regarding these three different approaches which they can follow to review the relevant literature. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Do you remember the title of that paper by Mr. Dontu in JBR?
If you want, I can share the screen.
Well, no problem. We will share the title in the description in the video given below.
Yeah, yeah, I can.
The link for this.
Yeah, I'll share that article with you later on. I mean, the title of that article I'll share with you later
No
on.
problem. So, thank you, ma'am, for answering that question that they should go ahead with SLR or first go through that. So here I have one more doubt, ma'am. The doubt is SLR got a particular format. There are certain framework like Prisma, 6C, etc. The frameworks are there. But when they write about the review of literature, I remember 10 years back, it was something like you write the study. Sharma 2010 done a study, then Gupta has done a study there. And one of my mentor told it's not review of literature, it's simply collection of the studies. But now how should they write it? Is there any way it should be written, ma'am?
Yeah, so I mean, really, you're right, in pointing it out, because in our university, like in my own department, also the same pattern we used to follow a few years back, but now we have changed the pattern. So what we are asking the student is, once you have read so many papers, now you try to conceptualize, or you try to have a framework of your study. So because now, if the problem is clear to the student, to the PhD candidate, if the problem is clear, and now if he has identified the research gap also, so he has validated that research problem with the help of the research gap. So now we would ask him to theorize a model, to provide a framework, so that conceptual model he should be able to build up. So we are not asking him to, review the articles in a chronological order or in some way. No, what he has to do, a candidate has to do, is that if suppose he feels he has a strong conviction that this model is premised on these different 3-4 theories, right? What he has to do is he has to review the articles based on those theories. So two things he has to keep in mind. One is the theory, and second, those constructs which are relevant for his study. So now if I have to talk about here, suppose I'm talking about job, resources and demand theory, JDR, job, demand and resources model, if I have to talk about. Like job, resources and demand model would be different in a services context, would be different in even in the financial services sector, it would be different. It would be different when you talk about the manufacturing context or when you talk about the telecommunication sector. So these resources and demands would be totally different in each sector. So if you are now, I would ask the scholar to review the articles related to job, demand and resources model, but keeping in mind those constructs which are relevant to your context. And then see that that how many papers you can classify under this theory, again pertaining to those constructs which are your key constructs. And second theory, suppose I'm saying social exchange theory. So with regard to social exchange theory, you would find number of articles being published on social exchange theory. But now if I'm talking about, this is something, the reciprocal relationship between an employer and an employee. So I should not talk about those papers wherein, they have talked about the relationship between an employee and a customer, or a customer and an employer. So you have to categorize your papers as per the theories, but then you have to see that which papers are closely related to my study. That does not mean that you should not read other papers. those papers which are not so closely related, but somewhere which is going to broaden your horizon. So it is always better to read the papers. But when it comes to writing, you have to classify your entire model, the theoretical model, into different heads. And then you would classify your articles according to those heads. And then you would write down that, yes, in this, they have used this model, and based on that model, they have found these were the relationships. And this is what they have suggested, because I'm talking about reviewing the articles. What is important here? I, as a student, PhD student, should be able to identify the research gap after reviewing all those papers. So classification of the papers has to be done. It can be done based on the theories and then the constructs under each theories which you have taken up. And then at the end, you draw the research gap. So if you are using 3 or 4 different theories, then you see that how your study would add something to this theory. What extension your study would provide to these theories. So that would emerge from your this literature review paper, from your chapter on the literature review. So no more we are, so I mean, I'm not overemphasizing, or I'm not underestimating anybody's research potential, but the thing is, uh, we as a supervisor also, there is a need. I mean, we ought to learn new things so that we can pass on those new things onto the scholars also. So this onus lies on us also, that how much we want to learn, or how much we keep our eyes and ears open, and how much we are receptive towards the change which is taking place in the academic writing, in the thesis writing. So the same we would be transmitting to our students, PhD students. So this is what we are following nowadays.
There is a one follow-up question also, ma'am, related to review of literature. When should we stop the review of literature? Because till the last day you are writing the thesis, there's a new paper coming in, and then again you get disturbed that, oh my God, somebody has already published what. Then how much way to stop for?
Yes, again, a very relevant question, because even the last day, you are very much right also, even the last day when you are submitting, you're about to submit your thesis, and if you come across a paper which is closely related to your research work, should I ignore it? I think as a researcher, if you are a serious researcher, you would always try to add whatever relevant points you would get from that paper. You would always try to add. Now here, what I would suggest, initially, if the scholar, the PhD candidate is not comfortable reading A-star journal or A category journal, ask him to read the articles which have appeared in the C category journals or B category journals. Gradually ask him to move up from C to B category. C is to gain clarity regarding those concepts. Then go to B category so that he has more clarity, a more sharpened view of looking at those concepts. Then ask him to move to the A category and thereafter to the A star category. Now, where to stop reviewing the article? I would like what I normally ask my PhD candidates to do. Once they have reviewed the articles in the A star and A category journal, they have to always keep their eyes open, and they have to keep them, and they have to be vigilant about those articles which are appearing in A star and A category journals. When you are submitting your thesis, and if you find that a new paper has appeared, which is quite relevant to your study, you must review that paper. You must insert the inputs from those papers in your thesis. I would say that if any paper has appeared in the B category journal or C category journal, you can ignore it. You can ignore it. But if it has appeared in A star journal, in a A category journal, then you should. And if you would ask me that, whether a candidate should also review the paper which has appeared in A-star journal, but in 1970s or 1980s, yes, I would suggest whatever are the relevant papers, closely related papers, which have appeared in A-star and A category journal, ask your students to review all the papers. Ask your students to review all the papers. They should know that these are the papers which have already appeared in these journals. So, and yes, once a thesis, they have binded their thesis, then there is no option. Before going for the binding, if they bind one new paper, relevant paper, they should always review that paper. It would take one more day, that's it. So I think the papers which, instead of reviewing 100 papers which have appeared in C category journal, I would ask the candidate to review 20 papers which have appeared in A star or A category journal. Because it is very difficult to understand what is written in those papers. I understand that, but at least, you would be confident, and this is how gradually you can, you can sharpen your scholar, and gradually you can expect that now he should leave those papers which have appeared in C category. He should move to the B category, and then to that. This is how, even when they are asking for the paper publication, so maybe let them try, initially let them try the B category journal, and then gradually you can ask them to go to the A category journal or A star journal. But yes, if as a supervisor you want that he should get publications in A category journal or A star journal, then and when you want that your name should also appear in that paper, that your contribution has to be significant. As a supervisor, our contribution has to be significant. And one more concern here, which most of the PhD candidates they have, that the supervisors, they keep their name first, whereas it is the contribution of the PhD candidate which is maximum. So I think author ordering, if you do not want to annoy, and if you want to justify it properly, and if you want to provide some logic to it, so it is always better that author ordering should be as per the contribution being made. As a supervisor, I cannot say that this is a paper written by me. No, as a supervisor, your name would be there on his thesis. But when we are writing a paper, so we are not reproducing something from the thesis, so we are writing a paper as a different contributor. So the one who has the maximum highest contribution, he has every right to be the first author. I think this is some additional additional information which I have provided. So justification has to be given, proper.
And that's so generous of a ma'am to say such, but I doubt whether the PhD students have in any capacity to decide about this sequence. It largely depends on their guide, and guide should think over this issue.
Yeah, I agree. But that's what I'm saying. This is for us, for the supervisors to think about all these things. Because when we are writing the papers with the foreign authors, and they are very particular about these things. And once the paper is written, then they would decide, and then they would take your consent also, whether this author ordering is appropriate or not. And yes, it is because as per the contribution, the author ordering is being made. So it is, I mean, so scholar, PhD candidate is not in a position to say like this, but that's what I'm saying, that, it is on us to decide. And we should try to justify, and
Very true, ma'am. And recently, I have seen in some journals they even ask for contribution. Do you have to write contribution specifically? What this
yes,
author has,
yes.
you have to write that.
Yes, yes, yes. This is in recent past only they have started with this practice, for each author, because now what is happening is multiplicity of the authorship. Dr. Neeraj Kaushik, you write a paper and you write my name in it. I'll write a paper, so I'll do it. Whereas your contribution, my contribution in your paper is zero, your contribution in my paper is zero, but we are authors in two papers. So because of that, nowadays what they are asking for is that the contribution of each author, what each author has contributed. So I mean, that is actually, and this is what we have to give in writing nowadays. So this is what has been contributed. So that also shows, that if the first author has the maximum contribution, And that is why he is the first author. And the last author, because his contribution is minimum, and that's why he is the last author. So rightly pointed out by you. So nowadays we have to give, I mean, we have to provide this justification also, you know, about contribution, how much we have contributed, each author has contributed. Yes,
Yes,
true.
ma'am. So, ma'am, let's come back to one question of the scholars they ask quite often. Like I'm working on a topic of intentions, buying intention of electric vehicles, and it's
Yeah.
already been 1 year or 2 year, and things are going on. I found a thing suddenly same topic with the same industry.
Sorry, I did not address this question earlier, though you asked me about this electronic vehicle also. What happens, you know, normally we are our young, you know, PhD candidates, they are very enthusiastic about such type of topics. But then, you know, we tend to forget one thing, that India would be, maybe I would say, would may not be the last country, maybe, you know, maybe among the 10 last countries who are actually the pioneers in the technology development, in introducing the new technology. So when you talk about electronic vehicle, so I still remember, I think 2 years back, I have reviewed a paper on electronic vehicle. So how do the consumers, you know, their adoption towards such type of new technology, their apprehensions, and I mean, why they are not able to take quick decision regarding buying this vehicle also, electronic vehicle also. So their apprehensions and the certain obstacles, or you know, certain factors which you call as hindering factors, or so, you know, it is always better if the PhD candidate wants to do research on such type of contemporary issues. So it is always better ask him to review the articles, or review the articles first of all on these, on maybe like technology adoption, if you're taking an example of electronic vehicle, and then ask him to think about how your study would be different from the studies which are already there. I may not be talking about the journal articles. I may be talking about the simple article, you know, which have the articles which normally appear in the magazines. Or maybe you can ask him. So nowadays, so you would find many case studies have been written on these. You know, Schul is one of the leading electronic vehicle manufacturing company. So there are no so many case studies have been. So what happens most of the times, as a supervisor, we are also not aware of it, because we were never interested in probing, in, you know, reading such type of articles. And that is why, because of our ignorance, unawareness, I would say rather, that we are not able to guide our scholars properly. But if they are interested, like in mobile banking, or nowadays we talk about, you know, mobile gadgets, other things, whatever it is related to the technology, they are talking about adoption, technology adoption. They can take up such type of topics, but these topics, then what you have to see is you have to look at such type of topics from the Indian perspectives, from the consumer psychology, Indian consumer psychology point of view. Is it clear? Like what happened when ATMs were introduced, ATM machines, they were installed. So way back, it was a topic given to my, I gave topic to my MPhil candidate. So she worked on that ATM, and then we came out with so many factors which were creating, you know, obstacles, so as to adopt that technology. Similarly, when you talk about, because you know those conditions are not the same, the conditions which prevail in US or in UK or in developed nations, those are not the same conditions which prevail in India. So our the apprehensions which we have, why we are resisting to this, you know, buying of a electronic vehicle, our resistance is because of other factors. Those are because of other factors. So your candidate has to probe, and he has to go beyond those factors which have already been identified in the developed nations. Is it clear? Because when we say the environmental conditions are different in India, so we should not try to replicate it, but we should try to provide more factors to it, that what could be the more predictive factors which can lead to that, that why these people in India, they are not in favor of buying these electronic vehicles. So what you have to do is you have to think differently about the problem. Even if that problem persists everywhere, in each country the problem persists, but you don't have to look from the problem which is the way the Americans, they are viewing it, they are looking at it. You have to perceive the problem as an Indian, and you have to see that what could be the intentions, and why they have formed their attitude which is not in favor of buying an electronic vehicle, or those who are in favor of buying electronic vehicle, what are their characteristics, their personality traits, and how they are different from the other people. And if majority they are apprehensive, or they resist, resist towards buying, and even the parents are not encouraging their young children, young kids, to buy the electronic vehicle. So what are the apprehensions as parents? So so I mean, different from different perspective, if you would try to analyze the problem, then I think that would be an excellent study. That would be an excellent study. But if you would say that, without reading the papers, if you would say that, that no such research work has been done, then I'm sorry, we need to review all the papers. We need to review. So that is why, because we are not reviewing all the studies which are there, published studies, because we are not reviewing all the studies, as a result we are not able to identify the research gap. At the end, there is no research gap, because whatever we intended to do, that has already been done in the past. So I do not discourage the candidates that they should not take up such type of studies. Yes, it is always good, but then something like we say out of box. So out of box solution, if you want to provide, so you have to think differently. Your problem should be different. Your perspective, the way you would look at that problem has to be different. Then yes, you can sell that. You can always sell your paper. Yes, sir. I hope I have
Thank you,
addressed
ma'am.
it this time.
So, ma'am, yeah, sure, ma'am. So, ma'am, so far we have discussed, if I summary so far. So you told us how to read a paper, about the 5 questions are there. Then you told us that when you start writing, what you should look for. You told us structure about the 4 thing, where objective comes at the 4. There should be a question, then there should be some sort of maybe theoretical line is behind it, then there is a research gaps, and then the research question, and then the objective and the following things are there. Then you told about how when you write your first paper, it can be SLR, it can be meta, generally with the theoretical paper, you recommend that it should be there. And some allied questions you replied. Now we come to 2 more questions. The question is, ma'am, how to select a journal? And particularly this because some time back you told me that most of our scholar, even faculty members, ma'am, scholars and everything, they don't know the objective or aim of that journal, scope of the journal. Like these things are very alien. I doubt whether people really go for these, and on this basis the paper is rejected. So, ma'am, how should we select a paper? Sorry, journal. How should select the appropriate?
So like before writing a paper, we know that how much we are capable of doing it, or to what quality we would be able to write, that paper, or which level our paper would be able to meet up. So when before writing a paper, because if we have clarity regarding the problem which we have identified, and there is a research gap also, so if I am not flying that high, so at least I would say that I am targeting a journal, a category journal, if I have to say. So now what I would do is I would scan. So nowadays, it is very easy. Why I'm saying, because if you look at the ABDC ranking, which is being followed by the Indian management researchers. So if not, I mean, they do not prefer ABS ranking, which is more, preferred by the European researchers, management researchers. So going as per ABDC, so I would suggest you look at all the journals which are there in the A category. And then you see that out of these, because that list is, it's a very huge list, a large list of journals which have nowadays, they have fallen in A category. Then you see that out of these list of, I would say rather, must be around 50-55 journals, if I say. Out of those 50-55 journals, if you select, these are the 5 journals which I can target for my paper. Then you have to read carefully the aims and the objectives of each journal. Because certain journals are such which prefer empirical papers. Certain journals are such which prefers qualitative papers. So certain journals encourage, both qualitative and empirical papers. Conceptual papers like review. If review is written, so that means that their preference is more for the theoretical papers, conceptual papers. So you have to keep in mind if it is your empirical paper, and then out of those list of 60-65 journals, you have to shortlist at least 4-5 journals, 7-8 journals also you can shortlist. Then you have to seriously read the aims and the scope of the journal. Seriously read the aims and the scope. After that, if you have shortlisted that these are the 3 journals which I can target, then you see that after, because you have gone through the aims and the scope, then you look into the author's guideline. Look into the author's guideline, and then you can see that once you have written the paper, that then you can see that which author's guideline your paper is fulfilling completely. That journal can be targeted. Author's guideline can be kept at the end, but what you have to see is that you have to go through the aims and the scope. If I'm writing a paper, because like nowadays I write a paper which has a multidisciplinary sort of approach which I follow. So if I'm relating, example, employee engagement with the customer engagement. So not necessary that because my outcome variable is customer engagement, so I should target a marketing journal, because it has employee engagement construct as well. So maybe I should look for a journal which would be ready to publish, or which is interested, I would say, which is interested in looking into the impact of employee engagement or a customer engagement, or not necessary that in this case I should target HR journal only. Because it's suppose that I'm for this I'm contacting the bank employees and the bank customers, so it is a services sector I'm talking about. So I can target a journal like Journal of Services Marketing, Journal of Services Management also. So such type of journals can be targeted because they are more sector specific. Sector means their focus is on the services. And if I am also focusing, my emphasis is also more on the services, the nature of the services, the uniqueness, the peculiarity of those services. If I'm focusing more on that, so then I can always target such type of journals. So I think before writing, I mean, you can write down your abstract, but before you start writing your paper, so you should always target a journal. You should always keep a journal in your mind. And then journal in your mind means only after getting clarity regarding its aim and its scope. Then you should be, then you can start writing the paper. And then, at the end, you can look into the author's guideline also, because you have to keep in mind, in certain cases, you would find it is not only for the referencing pattern or referencing style which has to be followed, which is important, but more important is the structure which they would give, that the flow of the paper and the sections, the subsections, and more important than this is also the maximum word length, word count which they give. So that also has to be, you have to keep in mind all these things also. So I think you can, and if you're targeting B category journal, then also you can shortlist 4 or 5 journals, and then you can select 2 or 3 journals. And then at the end, once you are done with your paper writing, then you can see that out of those 3 journals, which journal you should target first.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, I have now a couple of more questions, but these are very secret questions which reviewers generally don't reveal. So if you can,
Yeah, I don't. I don't.
Okay, ma'am, somebody told me that as a reviewer, if you are a reviewer of that person, they say how many this person has in the B category or the C category, the profile of the person. So if the profile is not good, so the fate of that journal is decided, it's not good and it will be going to be rejected. So if the person already written, I'm talking about the writer, ma'am. If I've been told that the reviewer check the profile of the author, and if it is like 2-3 B category are there, then it can be considered. Like if straightforward you are going for A, it's bound to be rejected.
No. I don't think so. No, I mean, one thing is that, a reviewer does not know anything about the authors. We have no idea about the authors. We do not know who has written the paper. When I'm saying that, the Indian management writers or the authors, from the methodology we come to know. Because the survey data were collected from the India, from this part of the country, from which part of the country. That otherwise, the author related information is not passed on to the reviewer. But
ma'am, I'm mistaken. Sorry, ma'am, I'm mistaken. It's about the editor. Editor know the details.
Yes. Editor knows the detail. And yes, I mean, you may be right also. They look into it. Like if you are targeting a European journal, if there is a European known researcher is there as a co-author, then they would seriously look into it. The potential, whether that paper has the potential for publication or not. But again, I would say, how to face this challenge. So let's be very positive about it. How to face this challenge. I would talk about a paper which I and my PhD candidate, we sent it out for publication in Journal of Small Business Management, and it's a good journal, John Whaley's journal. So I mean, it's a very reputed journal, Journal of Small Business Management. We received a risky revision for it. Then I invited Professor Pankaj Patel. That time he was in Villanova University, USA. I invited him that, if you can contribute, because it was a risky revision. So I thought, maybe this paper might get rejected. So after revision, it might get rejected. So because Professor Pankaj Patel is known, I mean, you can just scan his profile on the net. So you would come to know. So yes, he has revised the paper substantially, I would say, but not maybe because that paper was on women entrepreneurship. So certain themes are so much related to our country, and that people, they are always interested in publishing your papers if you have written on that particular theme. Like if you're writing paper on bricolage, and Indians are known for jugaad, and if you are able to write something nowadays, papers on bricolage, they are also being published in the FT50 journal, like Strategic Management Journal also. Strategic Management Journal has also published a paper on frugal innovation, that is jugaad, bricolage. So I think as a management student and scholars, researcher, we need to think about those topics which are very much India specific, our country specific, for which the other authors means the authors in the foreign countries, they do not have any clue, although they have not much idea about it. So yes, editors, it is their prerogative. Editors, associate editors, sometimes yes, they take the decision based on this also, that these are not the known names. And I think it happens, I mean, I'm of the view that it happens in the marketing journals also. that they look into it whether that particular those authors, they are the known academicians in the marketing field or not. But we cannot say for all the journals like Academy of Marketing Science. The justification which they would give to reject your paper, the justification, their comments and suggestions, when you would look into those comments and suggestions, you would feel convinced, yes, they are right, that we should target some other journal, or the quality has to be improved, or somehow certain journals are such where the company data are required, longitudinal data are required, panel data are required, company based data they are required, then only they would publish your papers. So they are not publishing the data which you have collected by using the subjective measures. So if you are using financial company measures, or if you are using those objective measures, then they would publish your paper. So certain things, even we as an author, we need to have clarity regarding those things also. So if we are expecting that by using those subjective measures, perception based data, if we are using perception based data, and if we try to target FT50 or A-star journal, very difficult, because they want, and perception based means we cannot establish cause and effect relationship. So kindly unmute yourself. I could not hear your question. Yeah.
This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, ma'am. So we are back and one of the challenges that editors feel is every day they get the papers in hundreds or maybe more than that. So as they say, selection is a rejection because it comes in. Ma'am, one other question I have about the reviewer now, this time about the reviewer, that these days now suddenly we see an upsurge in the qualitative analysis, and people say that you shouldn't simply do a survey, write a mixed method.
Yes. So if we want, Dr. Neeraj Kaushik, what happens is, like, nowadays, because you are right that, editors, they are receiving so many papers on daily basis. So, I mean, then, they fix up the criteria on what basis they should reject the papers. Most of the papers, they can be rejected. So if you want that, your paper should not get such type of desk rejection, so it is always better to follow a mixed approach. Mixed approach means qualitative analysis followed by the quantitative analysis. So it is always better if you are and that can be made possible when you are talking about the new constructs. Those new constructs which are quite, context specific constructs, or your country specific context constructs if you are talking about. So in that case, you can always generate the data qualitatively by conducting the interviews in group, in-depth interviews, or maybe, whatever structured or unstructured interviews, different methods you can follow to collect the qualitative data, analyze it, and then you try to quantify it. Even in case in the marketing journals also, this is the preferred approach. And if you have done that, so this indicates, when you are following a mixed approach, that shows you have undertaken qualitative analysis. Qualitative analysis means now you have added something to the theory, existing body of literature, you have added something to it, and then you have tried to quantify it. So that adds value, to the literature. So there is a uniqueness. Uniqueness means why you have what you have got. I mean, when you talk about the qualitative analysis, so there has to be something which is new for the audience. Is it clear? So that is why this type of approach is being followed nowadays. And if you write a paper wherein they say this is a study 1 qualitative analysis followed by study 2, that is the quantitative analysis. So that, I mean, that is something I would say that improves the quality of your paper also. So it brings more robustness to your analysis. So your analysis becomes more robust also. So something which is, you can say, qualitative followed by quantitative. So you are providing more instead of, first paper, writing one paper on qualitative analysis, second paper on quantitative analysis. No. So you are writing one comprehensive paper wherein you are providing both qualitative, the findings of the qualitative, whatever information you have collected, and the quantitative data also, the results of the quantitative data. So you are looking at the problem from different angles, and maybe you are trying to analyze the problem from different perspective. So this is always nowadays it is being preferred also. And though it is difficult, but nowadays what is happening is most of the journals, they are encouraging that the authors, they should come out with the qualitative studies. They should come out with the qualitative studies, because whichever construct you talk about, so they are more, I mean, when you talk about the marketing constructs or constructs in the HR domain also, so we are talking about the employee psychology, we are talking about the customer psychology, we are talking about the characteristics or the personality traits of the CEO, we are talking about top management team. So what are we talking about? We are talking about the psychology. So psychology means it is always better to observe that psychology. I mean, how do they behave? Why do they behave like this? So it is always better. So if you would, if you would conduct a research by considering these people, the poor consumers, bottom of pyramid consumers, so everybody would be interested in reading the findings, that paper, because it has something which is not known to the rest of the world. So on the poor consumers, how do they take the decision to buy a product? May it be something like television, or maybe a phone also. How do they take the decision, and how do they go about buying a product, any electronic gadget also? So something of this sort, of course, yes. I mean, this is something which is interesting and which everybody wants to read. So, to my mind, I think yes, you are right that scholars, they should think, PhD candidates, they should think about following both the approaches, qualitative as well as quantitative.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So, ma'am, you gave a very detailed discussion about the how to write introduction part, and that is you told one of the most important part of your entire paper, and largely that decides the fate of the paper. It's not about the technique you have used, and you have always mentioned that the technique should be appropriate. The statistical tool, test, and technique, they should be appropriate and right as per the whatever the conventions are there, citing the giving the proper citation. Now, ma'am, coming to the discussion part, I have noted that most of the scholars repeat what they have already written in the data analysis in the discussion part. So how the discussion part should be written, ma'am?
In the results and analysis section, what they have to do is simply they have to report whether their hypothesis is supported by using whichever technique they have used. So whether their hypothesis finds support. So whatever they have hypothesis, whether it gets supported with the data which you have collected. So only the rejection or the acceptance of the hypothesis has to be written in the results and the analysis. That's it. Whereas in discussion section, what you have to write down is if your hypothesis 1 is accepted or is supported. So in that case, you have to write down, you have to cite those papers wherein the same hypothesis was supported. So if you, in your case, if you say that X positively and significantly related with Y, and this relationship between X and Y, it has also been reported in the previous 2-3 studies. In the discussion, you have to provide support of the previous studies which provide support to your finding. Your finding you have already stated in your, you have already written down in your results and analysis, right? Now what you have to do in discussion is you have to take up your hypothesis one after the other again, and you have to say the hypothesis one, which says that there is a positive and significant relationship between X and Y, and this finding is also, this finding has also been supported in the studies conducted by such and such. So in the previous studies, they also found the same results. Now, if hypothesis 2, wherein you say that there is a positive and significant relationship between X1 and Y1, this was your hypothesis, right? In your case, this hypothesis gets rejected. Now you would write on, in contrary to our findings, the previous studies conducted by such and such, they found that there is a positive and significant relationship between X1 and Y1. However, in our context, in our study, this hypothesis gets rejected because of these reasons. Now the hypothesis, because you have set up a hypothesis which says positive and significant relationship. In your case, if it suppose it turns out to be negative, or if it turns out to be insignificant, now in your case this hypothesis gets rejected. Now what you have to do is, as a researcher, this is your visitor, that now you have to provide justification to it, that why in your case this hypothesis gets rejected. And trust me, this is a theoretical implication. This is a theoretical implication of your study. This is a unique contribution of your study. This is a unique contribution of your study, that the hypothesis which was accepted in all the previous studies, in your case, this hypothesis gets rejected if you have a sound justification, explanation for it. Then yes, everybody would be interested to buy your idea. So this is the main difference between results and analysis section and the discussion section.
Okay. And ma'am, finally coming to the implication, number of journals, they insist you write separate theoretical implication and managerial implication. So theoretical implication, those who have given the theoretical, they start with the theory and given a theoretical framework, it's easy for them to correlate with them. But when it comes to managerial implication, scholars often find it's very difficult, but to write exactly there, if you can just.
So like in case of a managerial implication, I would suggest the PhD candidates that they should look into, because we always ask them to prepare a descriptive statistics table. So there they should see that which item has received the lowest mean score. So if they have used 5-point scale, so those items which have received closer to 3 or below 3 mean scores, and where the standard deviation is also not that high, where homogeneous opinions, they have formed, the customers or the employees they have formed. So it is always better to frame your managerial implications based on the mean scores. Based on the mean scores. So if you are using, whether you're using agreement scale or you're using the satisfaction scale, always look into those, those gray areas. Which are those gray areas? Identify those gray areas, and then based on those gray areas, then you make the suggestions. You provide your managerial implications based on that. And so gray areas, when I say the weaknesses, right? So whatever is the strength, so they need not to think about those strengths, but at least where the opportunity is there for them. The opportunity is that where their customers are not satisfied, where their employees are not satisfied, why employees are switching, after 2-3 years, why they are switching. So from those mean scores of each item, you would come to know that which are the gray areas. You would come to know that where the organization needs to focus more, where they ought to, emphasize more. And accordingly, so managerial implication, they should not, it should not be based on what is there in the mind of the researcher. No, what you found, what your data speak, it should be based on what data actually talk about. So simply from you have to look into those mean scores only, and then you can based on that. So those items which have received lowest mean scores, so your suggestion should be regarding, how to strengthen those areas. So I mean, according to me, this is what normally I do.
Thank you, ma'am. And that makes sense also. And finally, ma'am, coming to the future directions, because it's again said that right is the future direction. Is it simply your limitation you write in that, or it's more than that?
No, 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 it is more than that. Limitations have to be written down. So what I do is like limitations and future research direction. So in one paragraph, write down the limitations, whatever limitations your study has. But in the future research directions, I mean, you should not, you should not write something like, which does not give clarity to the researchers. So if you are suggesting that, you should add more mediators or moderators in the future study, you should list down those mediators and moderators. Simply writing down that mediators and moderators would not be sufficient. If you are saying that, this such type of study should also be replicated in other sectors, be specific about those sectors. Not that your study can be, if you have conducted in SME sector, it cannot be replicated in the services sector or maybe in the banking sector. So, I mean, whatever suggestions you are giving for the researchers, those have to be very specific. Those have to be very specific. So if you are talking about, that we have considered these two moderators we have considered. So you cannot, you cannot say that, more moderators should be checked. Now, because you as a researcher, you know that which other moderators can be checked, which other mediators can be checked. Or if you want that, not talking about mediators and moderators, but you can also, you can suggest, the role being played by these variables can also be confirmed in the future studies. So future research direction is, so then you would find, in most of the studies, limitation is like my data are cross-sectional in nature. So I'm suggesting longitudinal study should be conducted. Or maybe I'm saying that I'm conducting the study in emerging economies context. It should be conducted in developed nations context. So these are not sense making future research directions. So when you're saying future research directions, so you should provide a direction to the researcher. These are the two three ways in which you can write down the papers in future. So provide them with a clear direction. So I mean, it should not be vague. You should provide a clarity to them that, if they want to conduct a research in this area, so how to go about it. Doing it means that, which other variables they should add, or what other precautions they should keep in mind while conducting the future research.
Yes, that makes sense. So it must be from that particular paper, and the circumstances should not be a ready-made recipe that these three
Yes.
lines we need to write. Sure.
Yes.
So, ma'am,
Yes.
it's such a wonderful session. I tried to, ma'am, give voice to some of the very common questions of the scholars, but I assume that so many people are at the different life cycle. Some people are, written B and now struggling for the A. Some people have specific doubts, etc. So, if it's possible, ma'am, maybe some other session, if we can take the questions from these people, and then we can go ahead. So maybe in some future.
Sure. Yes, yes. Why not? I'm always interested, and I'm always ready also for such type of sessions, because I do not want, again, my one piece of advice to all the PhD candidates is that, do not emphasize on techniques. No, techniques means we are making use of techniques only to test our hypothesis. So do not overemphasize on the techniques. You have to be particular, and you have to be very much careful, and you have to be very serious about the problem which you have identified. Then, because you have to identify the research gap, and then you seriously, objectively, scientifically, you systematically, you should conduct your research work. So this is my, word for the scholars. But do not, do not look for more workshops which talk about, these are the steps to be followed to conduct to make use of the various statistical techniques. So there are so much of the literature is available on the internet, and that's why, wherever I go for these workshops, so I always encourage the candidates, students, participants to ask as many questions as possible. So I'm not saying that, I am always prompt, or I may not be correct also in replying, responding to those questions, but I always try that, because like the questions which you have asked, so it provides many useful insights to me as well, so that increases my own information base, also my knowledge also gets enhanced because of this. And I'm always ready for such type of more sessions. But thank
Okay.
you very
So,
much for this session, sir.
so
Thank you very much.
before we close this session, ma'am, just allow me to tell two things to all the scholars who are listening it about you. So one thing is, ma'am is one of the most sought after resource person on the all topics of marketing and SAM particularly, etc. But it's so wonderful. Just a few days back, she told me that most of her papers involve multiple regression only. So she says, well, I don't focus on that technique. Multiple regression is more than enough if you focus on the rest of the area. That's the first thing.
Yes, yes,
Yeah. The
yes.
second thing is, ma'am, yeah, please. You want to say something?
So when I say that regression, so again, the point remains the same, that, yeah, I've conducted many workshops on SEM because students are interested, scholars are interested to learn more about the SEM. So whatever knowledge I have, so I try to share with the PhD students and other participants also. But now when I'm saying I'm using regression, it is because my research requires use of regression. So my purpose of testing the hypothesis, that purpose gets solved by using regression. Why should I use SEM? Because then, I need to report so many things when I'm using SEM. And then there is a problem of word count also. So that process, so I have to be very particular, specific about what to write and what not to write. So by adding so many techniques, so my word count is being used in that result and analysis section only, which I don't want to do. So I mean, we need to think logically about, and because of the research papers, because once you start writing the research papers, then you start realizing, that certain things, do's and don'ts. Then you start realizing.
Absolutely. And one of them about the word count, they face much at the advanced stage.
Yes,
So
yes,
before
yes.
initially they start writing anything, and then after 2-3 revisions, then they found, oh my God, how to compact all it in just 6,000 words or 5,000 words. There is so much
Very
to write,
difficult. Very
and which
difficult to
section
do.
to prune. That's
Yes, yes.
and the second thing, ma'am,
I
about
agree.
you. Yeah, second thing about you is, to my knowledge, you were the first person, at least in North India, who took workshop on how to write papers. I remember you took 2-3 workshops prior to this COVID scenario, and this was 2 days workshop. I think it's a 10 hours workshop, and here we have just 90 minutes or 100 minutes. We just try to encapsulate that. I understand it's not possible, but everything you can tell. But this is an attempt. We try to answer very common questions. Maybe in the next session we will have some more specific question from this one.
Sure, sure, sure. Actually, I love, and I always, I'm always ready also where the workshops on writing quality papers is being conducted. So I'm always ready for it, instead of, now talking about the techniques. So it is, the main purpose here is that, where I feel bad about is that, because as a reviewer, when I have to reject the paper, so I feel bad for my young scholars, also for my young faculty members also. So they have worked so hard to collect the data, but somehow some guidance is required, that, how to write the paper. So there is lack of supervision. So some guidance is actually required, and who needs to provide? We, the supervisors, we need to provide them this guidance, if they are targeting quality journals. So what are the expectations of those journals? So what do they expect, and where do we lack? So how to match, whatever we are able to perform, and what are the expectations? So how to bridge this gap between the expectations and the performance? So in that quest only, I have, till now, I think I have taken many workshops on writing quality papers, I think so. But I always enjoy, such type of workshops, because, there, what is more, what do I like more is the questions. I get many questions, and I really love to address those questions. Not talking about those techniques, you tell them about these steps, they would perform it, they would go away. and maybe after 2-3 days they would forget about the technique, or they would forget about those steps also.
and after 2 years, they will tell that new software has come into the market.
Yes. True. Very much right. Very much
On
right.
this note, thank you once again, ma'am, for this wonderful session. We'd like to see you once again sometime in future.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you very much, Dr. Neeraj Kaushik. Thank you very much.